Hi everyone, welcome to video 3.3. Today we're going to be talking about using a feminist literary lens. Our objective is that you are going to start reading chapter 3 of Mice and Men, and you're going to use the feminist literary lens to analyze this chapter. So I'm sure a lot of you have heard the word feminist before. Maybe some of you identify as a feminist, maybe you don't, maybe you know a lot about it, maybe you know little. It's basically a lens looking at women's equality, and I would expand that to say equality of people of all gender identities and expression. And as a reminder, a critical lens is a way of looking at a text. It's a way in which we can view literature. It's also called a literary theory or a critical lens, and it is a way of looking at the deeper meaning in literature. A literary lens is like glasses because it changes the way we see things. It changes what we see and how we look at or approach what we're reading. We're investigating 3 different literary lenses as we read this book of Mice and Men. The first one that we talked about in our last video was the Marxist lens, which was all about who had social power, who has money, who has influence, and how does social class impact the characters. The second one we're looking at is the feminist lens today, which is all about gender and sexuality. So some key ideas of the feminist lens that we want to think about is that society is run and dominated by heterosexual men. So this word heterosexual, that just means straight. And I want you to think about, in our country, who has been president or held positions of political power. All of our presidents have been men, right? For the vast majority, the presidents have been white, and as far as I know, all of them have been heterosexual or straight. So our society has been ruled or dominated by this white, straight man who has power and influence. And by that definition, we see that women and people in the LGBTQIA community are seen as others, or they're not seen as having high positions in society or being in power. This means that they hold an inferior position in society. So while men have historically been seen as the ones who are in control politically, you see like the CEOs of big businesses or banks, those are usually white straight men historically. And women have traditionally been the ones that stayed home and took care of the children and cooked and cleaned. And our society deems that work as less than or inferior. If you want to learn more about the history of feminism, I attached this link here from the History channel on our Schoology page, and you can feel free to explore that. So there are a bunch of questions we can ask while we read the book of Mice and Men to help us think about this feminist lens. The first question is, how do characters' gender and sexuality affect their power? So as you know, in this book of Mice and Men, most of the characters are male, right? And there's kind of only one main character who's a female, and that is Curly's wife. So I want you to think about, like, how does her gender as a woman affect the power she has on the ranch? Second question is, are there traditional gender roles? Do characters follow them? How are characters who do not follow them treated by others? So traditional gender roles, that's like the expectations you have based on what gender you are. So some traditional gender roles, like I already talked about, are that women care for children and stay home and they cook and they clean. That men are kind of the breadwinners, the powerful ones that go out and have jobs. So does this book have traditional gender roles? Where do you see them show up? Third question, what roles do women have in the text? Are they minor or prominent roles? So we only really have one woman who's in the book. What kind of roles does she have? How is she defined? Is she a main character or is she kind of a side character that's not very important? What influence does society and culture have on gender roles in the text? So the society and culture, remember, we're in the 1930s, we're on this ranch full of migrant workers who are all men. What are their kind of society and cultural views on women or on gender in general? Would an LGBTQIA character be accepted in this text? So this question, I have a personal connection to it. If you don't already know by my pride flags or my pins, I identify in the LGBTQ community. I have an older sibling who is also non-binary, meaning that they use they, them pronouns and they don't identify as male or female. So I think about like if my sibling and I were to travel back in time to the 1930s and go hang out with George and Lenny and the guys on the ranch. Would we be accepted? Would that be a safe and supportive environment for us to be open about our sexuality? And I don't really think so. So that is a question you can think about when you read a text. Are men, women, and people of other genders held to the same expectations as each other in the text, or are there different rules? I want you to think about the rules that Curly has for his wife. Like, she gets herself in a lot of trouble, or he gets upset with her because she goes and talks to other men, or because she goes and walks to places where she's not supposed to be. So what kind of rules does he have for her as a woman and as his wife? So now I want you to think about our own society, and you can think about like broadly the United States as a society. You could think about your own cultural context, or Cooper High School as a society, or your family as a society. What are some of these expectations or rules that you see for men? So do you think there's an expectation that men need to be really strong? They need to like work out and have big muscles. Maybe they need to feel like really masculine and they don't want to show a lot of emotion. Maybe men need to be the one to make the money, and it feels like they don't have, like, they're not achieving their masculinity if they're not making money. What are some of the expectations or rules you see for women in our society, at Cooper, in your family, etc.? Do women need to like makeup and like shopping and be really girly? Do they need to be really caring and empathetic and take care of children? All of these things. So what kind of expectations do you see for different genders? And then finally, do you think that men, women, and people of other genders have the same amount of power in our society? I want you to use some examples. So we talked about historically, like it's mostly been these white, straight men that are in power. And we have seen that that's kind of shifting, right? Like nowadays we see there are a lot of women and people of color and queer people in positions of political power or power in our society. In 2021, we actually elected the first openly transgender state senator in the United States. Sarah McBride is a Democrat in Delaware. And I think that says something about our history, that it wasn't until 2021 that we had an openly transgender person in that political position of power. So do you think it's shifting? Do you think there's still these power imbalances? What do you see in the world around us? We are not going to watch this video right now, but I did attach this video on Schoology if you want to watch more what is feminism, to explore this concept. You can look on Schoology. But I want you to start reading chapter 3 and think about gender and gender roles as you read this chapter.